Hello and welcome again to another edition of the Osteopathic Lyceum podcast. I'm going to take two historical osteopathic books, and both of them, if I'm reading them properly, are textbooks. The first one that we're going to talk about is definitely a textbook. It's by Edith Ashmore. And then the second one is, so that's Osteopathic Mechanics by Edith Ashmore, a textbook. And then Osteopathic Technic, Technic, by Ernest Eckford Tucker, or E.E. Tucker. There are very specific passages in both of them that I want to read so that at least on some level there's a record of understanding that at the early stages of the profession, the view of osteopathy as sort of a real panacea by the practitioners wasn't complete. It wasn't necessarily seen that way by these people who were there from very, very early in the profession. They understood to at least some degree that there were limits. Now, were limits to the success of the profession. Dr. Still also points at this. My general memory suggests that Dr. Still would talk about if he could get to people early enough, he would often be able to have success. So I'm going to read a portion from this book, Osteopathic Mechanics, a textbook by Edith Ashmore. First, I got to get to it properly. I'm actually going to read something. So Ashmore does something where if you've read Dr. Still's stuff, you'll see that it's an homage in some sense. It's this paragraph. So it's in the preface. There has been no attempt made at literary brilliancy or startling originality. I have kept in mind constantly the needs of the student as I have found them in my own college days of 15 years ago and during the past year while teaching the junior classes of the American School of Osteopathy. Other writers in our scientific journals have covered well the problems of technique, and to them I am much indebted, especially Drs. Carl P. McConnell and Harry Willis Forbes. So it's the first sentence. There has been no attempt made at literary brilliancy nor startling originality. Dr. Still would talk about things like writing. I write plainly, So that's what I would consider an homage to Still specifically. Where is it? Okay, so there is something that I've said, and the reason that I want to highlight this portion, something that I've said over time, is that the fundamental assumption of osteopathy is that there's a mechanical relationship between health and disease states. So the very first portion of the very first chapter in Edith Ashmore's book, Osteopathic Mechanics, is the lesion. I'm going to read a portion here so that I can extrapolate and show how there's a relationship between what I say and what's in the book. So what I say is based on being in contact with a lot of early material on purpose and then extrapolating it and trying to bring it forward in a way that allows the fundamental assumption of osteopathy to be understood such that you can work on finding out where it's strong and where it's weak, right? So I'll read this. Osteopathic mechanics is a system of animal mechanics which, taking into consideration the anatomical parts of the human body, especially the bones, ligaments, and muscles, recognizes disturbances in their relations, in particular malalignments and subluxations of joints, and explains the principles by which may be secured the normal apposition and adjustment of part with part. It is embraced by the larger subject of the principles of osteopathy, which, based upon sciences of anatomy, chemistry, and physiology, by application of a distinctive etiologic fundamental truth, establishes an exact diagnosis, a clear pathology, and a rational system of therapy. So the first thing that I'll do is just note subluxation as a term. Today, we can throw the term out because it has major issues with it, especially when used colloquially. So we'll just sort of acknowledge that it was written at a time where subluxations would have been understood differently, where currently we understand them in another way, and the term is not of as much use. The clear pathology, exact diagnosis, clear pathology, rational system of therapy. One would suspect that Ashmore is specifically talking about mechanical dysfunction. People today may say somatic dysfunction. In this case, she's talking about the lesion. Right? So she does provide a very clear definition of the lesion, which I'm going to read. The central thought of the science of osteopathy is the lesion, which has been defined as any structural perversion which produces or maintains functional disturbance. The word lesion has been derived from the Latin verb ledere, to injure. A lesion then is any maladjustment which ultimately causes an injury to tissues. Please excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Excuse me. That's the first time that's happened. Anyways, at least I warned you. Lesion then is any maladjustment which ultimately causes an injury to tissues, or it is an etiological factor in the production of disease and manifests pathological effects. A lesion is itself the result of injury and as such presents certain signs and symptoms. With the production of lesions with their signs and with the production of lesions with their signs and symptoms, with their removal are osteopathic mechanics concerned. The effects of lesion are covered by the subjects of osteopathic pathology and practice. So that would be look at other books, right? Not necessarily this book for the effects of lesions. But again, the note that the lesion is the mechanical disturbance which will allow for the production or maintenance of dysfunction, then we can reword it to what I say, which is osteopathy has the fundamental assumption that there are mechanical relationships between health and disease states. Okay, so Ashmore was very well known early on and very well respected, partially likely because she was a teacher, partially because she was an osteopathic professional very, very early on. So 15 years ago, the book was written in 1915, so she would have likely been a graduate in the range of 1900 or the early 1900s, so before 1910. I don't necessarily need to read a ton more about that, but what that does is, again, allow me to provide some support from early in the profession to the claim that I make that the underlying assumption is that there is a mechanical relationship between health and disease states. So now I'm going to flip over to the Tucker one. I think the Tucker book is from 1917. Make sure I'm in the right place. Oh man, was I? Oh man, did I lose it? I'll find it again pretty quick. Yep. Yeah, maybe I'll find it again. I'm sure I'll find it. 1917. Anyways, whatever. 1917, because I'm fumbling and stumbling here. Osteopathic technique. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry for the silence. There we go. Okay, now we're closer to where I want to be. There we go. Okay. So this is in the first chapter. It starts on page 3 of the book. The practice of osteopathy is no less strongly built upon facts. 1,000 men may be mistaken as to a question of opinion, of interpretation of facts, but as to the existence of those facts, 10 men or even 3 men cannot possibly be mistaken. There have been 10,000 men who bore testimony to osteopathic facts. So again, I'll continue to read. This is just setting the stage. These facts are discovered in each individual case and treatment is applied to them as found. So I'll pause there. When I am teaching, when I am talking about osteopathy, when I'm talking about almost any form of healthcare, one of the things that I'm going to advocate for is that people respond differently to the same stimulus. So realistically, what you're trying to do is figure out, know what response you want from what you're applying or what you're targeting. And if it's not that response, change what you're doing. So when I say things about the barrier concept, like don't make them say ouch, aka don't interface with a person in a way that makes them engage protective mechanisms. So any abrupt response to your movement, it's highly in line with what is said here. So the individual is more important than the preconceived idea. So if I make arguments to say that I wouldn't necessarily try to test people on the subdivided pre-existing systems of osteopathy, it's because I'm more concerned with how you interface with the person in the moment than how you interface with the ideas that somebody else wrote down and taught. I'm more concerned about how you relate to that person, interface with that person, and make sure that they respond within the range of what you're hoping to and aiming for. Okay, so make sure I find the place here. As found. To read again, each case contains its own evidence and correction is directed to that evidence, not to any general formula or description, which may or may not apply in an individual case. So Tucker reinforcing what I said after reading the first sentence. So at least there is some relationship to the things that I say, and this early work from somebody who some in osteopathy know well, some know not as well, whatever. Okay. To read again, the profession itself grew up on a basis of success. Things do not belong wrong. When found wrong, they were corrected, and no other reason or excuse was necessary. Okay, so something that I often say to students is you work on what's not moving. Okay, well, how do I do it? Why do I do it? Why would I do this thing? The only reason you ever do anything is because it's not moving as it would be predicted to move, especially in comparison to its paired structure on the opposite side. So if you have something to compare it to and you know it's not moving as well as the other side, then that's your rationale. You don't need any other rationale. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. To read again. But this was followed by cure. From the very first inadvertent experiment made by Dr. Still, the policy of correcting disorders was followed by good results and was pursued only and solely for that reason. Other men, seeing the good results that followed this policy, insisted upon being trained in it. From this beginning, the school arose and the profession was organized. There is no appeal from success. Things that succeed prove themselves true in relation with every law known and unknown that applies to them. So there's a way that Tucker is speaking very, very similarly to how Still writes. Still was the child of Methodist circuit riders who are generally known to be kind of fire and brimstone type preachers. So lots of maybe dramatic sentence structure, dramatic delivery. Tucker's sounding a lot like Still. And my understanding is that Tucker and Still were quite close to one another. Tucker would often... there are stories about Tucker following Still on his nature walks and Still knowing he was there, so he eventually called him out. And there's stories of Tucker meeting Still on his porch often, which wasn't hard to do because Dr. Still's house was right across the street from the ASO. It doesn't exist anymore. I don't remember when it's in its place. I feel like it may be a senior's home or a long-term care home in Kirksville. I don't remember that for sure. Anyways, to continue to read, this is the important thing. So Tucker was very close to Dr. Still. Tucker talked to Dr. Still a lot, and people will know him for that. At least in my experience, when people talk about Tucker in osteopathy, they talk about him because he was close to Still. So this paragraph, to me, seems meaningful. The success of osteopathy is not absolute. It does not claim to be the final revelation in the matter of healing. It believes itself to be absolutely fundamental, however, a necessary basis for whatever else of good may be found in the healing art, and to be unshakable in principle and in logic, without vanity for itself or antagonism for others, but in the spirit of impersonal estimate. It sees itself as a real science of healing, i.e. the first for surgery, abandons the question of cure and removes, saves, but does not cure. Medicine counteracts, stimulates, and sustains, and cares for, but neither of these nor any other science, except osteopathy alone, bases its practice solely on the principle of removing fundamental causes. So the first sentence is probably the most important thing, at least with respect to meaning and what I'm trying to point at, that osteopathy early on was aware that it wasn't the only thing, that it did have at least some limits, that other systems had value. You're not going to run, in my experience, into any profession that says anything other than it's searching for the root cause. One of the things I've heard, an axiom in surgery is a chance to cut is a chance to save. You're going to hear lots of things in varying subspecialties. Those subspecialties would learn in a way where what their findings would generally, whether or not it's explicitly claimed, be seen as root cause, fundamental to whatever disease process is being presented and that they're interacting with. So there is not a health profession that I've come across or a subspecialty that says that they're not looking for the root cause. I just don't know of one. So I tend to throw those statements out in the wash because everybody says it. So if everybody says it, I don't know if I can buy it from anybody. We're just looking at it in a different way. The thing that Tucker is talking about, though, is, in context, the mechanical relationship between health and disease states. So if it is wrong, it was to be corrected. If it was found wrong, it was corrected and good results followed. That kind of idea. But the fact that he says very explicitly, the success of osteopathy is not absolute. It does not claim to be the final revelation in the matter of healing. Right? So to paint early osteopathic practitioners as savants, as fantastic, as able to heal everything, as able to perform mechanical treatment better than today, I don't know that that's a fair assessment. I don't know that that is what they said. It may be what people have interpreted them to say. You know, there's general phenomenon of people looking to the past as if things were of higher quality or better. There are also the opposite phenomenon where people look and think the future is always better, right? So you can have these viewpoints of times that are not yours, positive, negative in either direction. But early osteopathy didn't get everything. They did learn surgery. So Dr. Still noted that, you know, surgery was but an extension of osteopathy. So when the mechanical correction didn't work, surgery in and of itself was osteopathy because it was applied subsequent to not being able to get to the mechanical dysfunction at the appropriate time. Therefore, surgery was required to save, right? I think he said that mostly in Research and Practice, which was 1910. I may be wrong, he may have said it earlier, but essentially he would note that surgery was but the extension of osteopathy. So they learned surgery very early on. Today in America, osteopathic physicians are doctors with unlimited medical licenses, so they can be involved in all subspecialties of medicine. The early osteopathic practitioners were aware of limits. They were aware of other things. You have Tucker, who is, at least to some degree, reasonably well known in some circles, saying it is not absolute. So the two things from two writers that I think have importance in osteopathic history that I'd like to point to, that I'd like to bring forward, that I think has value, is that both of them essentially note that the fundamental assumptions of osteopathy is there's a mechanical relationship between health and disease states. So again, to support that when I say that, it comes from the history of osteopathy from very early in its inception. And that also osteopathy wasn't the end-all be-all. It is very valuable, especially when the health or disease state, really the disease state is properly related to the mechanical dysfunction. When you change the mechanical dysfunction, the body should be able to self-heal and self-correct. However, if the mechanical dysfunction is altered and the body's not able to self-heal and self-regulate, then either it's not the proper relationship, so the mechanical dysfunction found isn't properly related to the dysfunction, or the dysfunction has been around so long that even with the restoration of movement, the body can't self-heal and self-regulate because of chronicity, as a term that some people appreciate. So just to note that if we properly look back at osteopathic history and are considerate of all of the things were said, you'll see the line that points to or connects to many of the things that I've said over time. This is me trying to respond to discussions that I've had across time with people who have given me valuable insight in that they appreciate the historic writing. Sometimes historic writing is painted as saying that osteopathy is this panacea. However, we can at least find early mention that osteopathy is not considered a panacea by people important in its history. So hopefully that was valuable. Hopefully my commentary shed some more light on what I'm saying. Hopefully you learned something. Thank you for sticking around this long, and we'll talk again soon.